Support for Central Florida Public Media comes from the University of Central Florida, offering their Masters of Science in Data Analytics program. Designed to enhance skills in data analysis and machine learning, the new Artificial Intelligence track offers specialized courses to deepen understanding of AI technologies and their applications. More at ce.ucf.edu/data.
I'm Sharon Stone. This is Engage. A major property tax overhaul lies in the hands of Florida voters. About half of Florida's 11 million properties were someone's primary residence and qualified for homestead last year, according to the Florida Legislature's Office of Economic and Demographic Research. To address affordability concerns, during a special session on Tuesday, the legislature approved a proposal that would lower a home's assessed value by $250,000, effectively reducing property taxes. Legislative Republicans say the taxes are too expensive, and local officials are spending too much taxpayer money on projects they consider wasteful. Earlier this year, Florida DOJ questioned local government spending decisions. Critics say the plan just shifts the financial burden. They're raising concerns about how local governments will pay for the essential public safety, education, and community services they provide that are funded by property tax revenue. Voters will have the final say in November. Elections and investigations reporter Sam Stockbridge joins Engage now to help us understand what's at stake here. So, Sam, let's start with the basics. What is a homestead property tax exemption?
It's kind of a mouthful, right? So a homestead counts as two things. It's got to be a primary residence, and it has to be property that the taxpayer owns. So that means that it doesn't count for the millions of Floridians who rent. It also doesn't count for businesses or for the second home. But the way that that works is that it allows you to get a discount on the value of your home before you calculate the property taxes that you pay to local government for it. So currently, Florida has a $50,000 homestead property tax exemption, which means that if you have a $500,000 home, you can pay taxes as though it's only worth $450,000.
So state lawmakers have tried to help with the cost of living for years, Sam. Lawmakers passed property insurance reforms in 2022 and 2023 to try and stabilize the market. And they've looked at property tax relief before in recent sessions. What was in the governor's proposal we're talking about now?
Yeah, so he had proposed, and now lawmakers are going to send it to voters to increase that homestead property tax exemption up to $150,000 starting at the beginning of 2027. And then by the middle of 2027, on July 1st, that would increase up to $250,000. So that's a lot. That covers a fair chunk of what a lot of people pay in property taxes. Now, because of how Florida deals with tax policy, those are going to be constitutional amendments, which means that they have to get approval from voters in November. They actually have to get 60% of the vote in order to become law. There are also some other things that were in his proposal. There's a limitation on what local government can spend that money on to what he considers core public needs, which would include things like public safety and infrastructure. And there are also some other nice little add-ons. He would tighten the cap on the amount that the assessed value of commercial properties can increase. So right now, your commercial property can't be increasing in value by more than 10%. If it's more than that, it gets capped at 10%. His proposal would bring that down to 5%. Also, another thing that doesn't offer immediate relief right now, but does sort of, for future growth, kind of limit how quickly things can grow in the future.
Talk to me about who supports this. Who are you seeing against it?
For this specific affordability proposal, it's been pretty much mostly Republicans supporting it. There were a few Democrats who ended up defecting to vote to put it on the ballot, but it was pretty much a party line split. And yeah, Republicans, including DeSantis, have really for a while now been saying that local governments essentially had a lot of largesse. They've had more money than they really should be spending on services that are perhaps unnecessary for most Floridians. And the idea is that when cost of living is so high, Florida taxpayers need a break, and reducing property taxes is a great way to put some money back in their pockets. The difficulty is that that money is going to come from somewhere, and in a lot of cases, that's going to make for a lot of pain with local governments actually trying to pass balanced budgets. that take into account these really big changes that were kind of made without a lot of input from them. In fact, a lot of them testified against them, or came out very strongly opposed to them during the special session this week.
So property taxes are one of the primary ways local governments fund services. And Sam, that funding is sparking so much debate locally.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And property taxes are a really important thing for pretty much any municipal budget. They fund a lot of important local services, and often they have kind of an invisible role in a lot of these things. I mean, obviously they pay for a lot of things like, depending on where you live, things like libraries or parks or community buildings or programs, but also they can take on a slightly less visible role. Like, for instance, if your town builds a new baseball diamond, often that's a big enough cost up front that they don't pay it all at once. Just like a brand new car, they'll pay a chunk, but with recurring payments that come back for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, they're paying off continuously. So there are these things that property taxes are kind of helping to fund that are longer-term investments in the community as well.
And we should point out the proposal was modified by the legislature from a plan rolled out last week by Governor DeSantis to maintain funding for schools, sheriffs, property appraisers, and other constitutional officers. Given that, how have local governments reacted to this proposal, Sam?
Kind of what I had alluded to earlier is there's been a lot of pushback. I think a lot of local governments feel that they have been very substantially left out of these conversations, that this was sort of forced onto them, and in a way that's kind of been a theme recently for a lot of local governments when it comes to restrictions on developments that I think a lot of communities would like to be able to have, but that the legislature has made very difficult for them to maintain. So the Florida League of Cities, for instance, put out a statement against this, as well as an association representing libraries, which, again, an area of the public sector that could stand to be affected by this by a great deal. And the reason for that opposition is that these cuts are big enough that they are going to really substantially reshape how local governments have to budget. You know, these are things that are going to require cuts, they're going to require changes to services, or if they don't require those things, they're almost certainly going to require increased fees or increasing taxes on other parts of their tax base in order to be able to maintain those services. So this is really going to dramatically reshape what these budgets look like, and that's frustrating and worrying, I think, for a lot of them as they get ready for the budgeting season up ahead.
Can we talk about what this means for renters more?
Yeah, as much as this could be a great boon for people who have homes, people who own property are not everybody in Florida. A lot of people still rent, whether out of preference or because they can't afford to buy a home right now. And this plan doesn't offer relief. And so there are a lot of groups that are worried that these changes could effectively lead some of that taxation to be shifted onto renters because they still are vulnerable in some sense. They don't have these protections that property owners do. In fact, here's Esteban Santis of the Florida Policy Institute.
So people who are renting, you know, what happens when the landlord gets a higher tax bill because the localities have to make up the difference? They're going to shift those costs.
So a lot of local governments are also bristling at the governor's insinuations or sometimes outright comments that they've been misspending money and that they've been collecting too much money in a way that is greedy and disadvantages Floridians. A lot of them are finding real roadblocks in their budgets in trying to acquire like basic services, things like fire trucks that have exploded in cost in the past 4 years. Gas and oil are expensive for municipalities the same way they are for the rest of us. And cities and towns and counties are also trying to offer competitive pay and benefits while the cost of living remains high. And those are all things that require a lot of money that a lot of local governments have been struggling to provide in the current environment. Because the governor's definition of what counts as core services, that could affect some of these things that we talked about, like parks and cultural events and rec programs that are considered maybe a little extraneous, but that are maybe popular in communities or that offer a lot of value. So there was some concern that they might not be able to fund those things even if their population wants to fund them. And perhaps even the bigger problem is that there are some municipalities that are worried that they won't have the money to actually fund the things that are protected as important investments, things like fire and police departments, because if you don't have enough money from your property tax base with these exemptions, you don't have enough money for them. Doesn't matter if you're allowed to spend the money on them. If there's not enough money in your budget to fund them, you can't fund them all the way. So that might mean cuts even for services that are important and that everyone wants to have funded.
Any counties or cities especially affected?
Yeah, I mean, almost all the municipalities that I've heard about or talked from are expecting some kind of disruption at some level, but it depends on where they are and what their tax base looks like. So, for example, Orlando is probably going to be somewhat insulated from a lot of these changes. I say somewhat, they're definitely going to have problems, but that's going to be offset a lot by the number of renters that they're going to have who aren't going to see their property taxes decreasing, and also revenues from tourism and from businesses and sales taxes. Those things are going to represent a pretty fair share of their budget that's going to help kind of cushion the loss of funding there. But the place where this is really going to be felt the most is in smaller communities, bedroom communities where there are a lot of homes. So one example of those would be Oakland, which is a small town. It's about 5,600 people on the western edge of Orange County. Here's town manager Elise Huey talking about their challenges.
We're not against reasonable property tax reform, right? But, to go up to 150 and then 250 in 2 years, that's a lot.
So with the full exemption, Oakland would need to close a roughly $1.5 million gap in their budget, which that corresponds to about a third of the money that they have in the general fund after they pay off debt and public safety. So a third. I mean, that would be pretty challenging, I think, for most of us to find a third of the money that you have to cut that out of your budget. That's a pretty big challenge.
I don't know. It's so tight, our budget already.
Huey said that some ways of addressing that could look like making cuts to the town's nature reserve or to its Arts and Heritage Center, which hosts the town farmers market. Again, those are two things that probably fall outside of the category of core public services that might be able to be funded through the governor's restrictions.
Okay, so where do things go from here?
That will be up to the voters. And that's a pretty open question, is whether there's going to be support from voters to pass this. So there's also a lot of concern from groups and government leaders that Floridians might not actually understand the ramifications of these cuts, that these are going to obviously make life more affordable for them in the short term, but that there might be this sort of tragedy of the commons trade-off where there are some longer-term costs for everybody in the community that are going to be inflicted if everybody gets these property tax breaks. And when we say everybody, again, it's only people who own this certain kind of property, not everybody. So we've been hearing a lot of these concerns being raised by towns and municipalities. We've had Oakland, but also Volusia County and Orange County, both on Tuesday, had expressed some real concerns about how this is going to affect their budget. Here's Orange County Commissioner Kelly Semrad.
And so I want to go into kind of learning mode so that we can, push and get a big coalition together to try to educate people to protect their quality of life, because I look at this as a serious danger to all of our qualities of life.
Central Florida Public Media elections and investigations reporter Sam Stockbridge, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
We also spoke to the CEO of the Homeless Services Network of Central Florida this morning. Martha R. has concerns about the impact to services if property tax revenues decline because programs depend on that local government funding.
And so we know that many of the agencies that work with homeless people receive funding from local jurisdiction and are quite dependent on that. And so we would anticipate a significant drop in available services, but not just for people who are already homeless, but for people who are on the cusp of homelessness, who need those services in order to maintain their stability. And so we would anticipate more people becoming homeless. We're just aware that there's absolutely going to be a reduction in funding for services if this goes through. And so that could affect employment programs, mental health services, childcare services, educational programs, all the things that community members count on to help them be self-sufficient.
Governor Ron DeSantis spoke Monday about the special session he called on property tax relief. He says local government's property tax collections in Florida have grown from about $32 billion in 2019 to $60 billion today and are projected to reach $83 billion by 2032. According to the governor, that growth outpaces inflation and population increases, making property tax relief an opportunity to reduce household costs.
My question is there anything else that can be proposed that would actually deliver thousands of dollars of savings every single year to taxpayers? Is there anything you've seen proposed in the city councils, the county commission, the state legislature, anywhere else where you would realize that type of savings? I haven't seen it. So if you're looking at helping people afford to be able to live and to be able to prosper, the property tax is the best game in town to be able to help with that.
We asked you what should happen to property taxes in Florida. Bob from DeLand wrote us a quote, "The plan that DeSantis is proposing makes absolutely no sense. It could bankrupt small cities. We should vote it down. The best solution I know of is the one California enacted years ago. When you purchase a home, your property taxes are set at 1.5% of the purchase price and can only increase by 0.5% a year. This allows the buyer to know just how much to budget for the purchase, payments, and taxes." Donna from Winter Springs wrote, "Yes, I'd love to have my taxes reduced, but at what cost? There needs to be more information about the plan, and there needs to be a plan for replacing the funds that are lost. Property taxes have long been acknowledged to be an inequitable way of funding government and schools. But before upending one system, there needs to be a careful, well-researched plan to provide the necessary funds in a fair and equitable manner." Thank you to everyone who took the time to write us. Engage is a production of Central Florida Public Media. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Richard Copeland is our senior producer. I'm Sharon Stone. You can reach us anytime with questions, comments, or story ideas. Send an email to engage@cfpublic.org. Thanks for listening.